A couple of weeks ago, somebody had posted on Reddit, on the Genesis Reddit, asked the question, what Phil Collins solo songs would sound good as Genesis songs if Genesis were to have done them? Now, let's go back and, hey, by the way, welcome to Everything Phil Collins. This is what we're talking about today. So let's go back in time to 1980, just before 1980, before Duke. So in between, and then there were three and Duke. There were three members, and then there were three. There were three members. Phil was starting to get a teensy bit more authority in the group, especially when it came to songwriting. In fact, this was the first-ish time that the other members would open up the songwriting to Phil for the album Duke. It also was a time when everybody was exploring their own solo records. There was a modicum of time off in between these records. And as we know, when Phil was working on Face Value, there was Small Creeps Day happening, I think A Curious Feeling too, right? So we know that Phil had written some songs that were chosen for Duke. And as we talked about in another video, we talked about the Genesis songs that sound like they could be Phil Collins solo songs. Today, we're doing the opposite. We're looking at some of Phil Collins solo songs that, what if the band had chosen these songs? What if Phil had offered these songs to the band? What if they were put through that Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford filter? What would they have sounded like? Better or worse? Would they have been longer, more elaborate? I've got a list of 10 songs I want to share with you. And as always, of course, I want you to list some songs in the comments below that you think would work really well. In fact, be thinking about them now to see if we have any in common. But going back to the late 70s of working on Duke, we know Phil had songs like Misunderstanding and Please Don't Ask that maybe would be better just as solo songs. And then we have some solo songs from that era, which we'll talk about shortly, that could have sounded interesting on Duke. Okay, let's dive in. Let's start at number 10. And I will say the top half of this list, like number 1 through 5, I think is really good and it'd be really intriguing to hear them as Genesis songs. And maybe one day AI can help us hear them as Genesis songs. It's like, let me hear Long, Long Way to Go if Tony Banks were to do it. You know what I mean? That'll probably happen in like the next 6 months. Anyway, the bottom half of this list, I think, is kind of weak. I felt like it was kind of difficult to look for 10 songs in Phil's catalog that would sound good as Genesis. So I'm not too thrilled with the bottom half. I'll maybe just fire through them real quick so we can get to the top half. I think there's some songs that would sound really good. Okay, so going down to the very bottom, starting at number 10 is We Fly So Close from Both Sides. Again, not great, not a great option. I know a lot of you love this song. I like this song a lot. It's kind of the most epic song on the album, so that's why I wanted to choose it. It's also like a love song, but that's a little bit, or like a relationship song that's not as like in your face as some of Phil's other songs. So that's why I thought maybe it could work well. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it'd be interesting to hear this one? There may be some Mike and the Mechanics influences, maybe some of that kind of like Curious Feeling type sounds. There's a fly. It's like a baby fly. What is going on? Where are they coming from? Number 9 is a song you may not be familiar with. And I usually like to stick to album songs here, but I'm going to include a B-side called Around the World in 80 presets. Around the World in 80 presets. So this would sound really cool as a Tony Banks song. And now as I listen to it, I actually think this should be higher on my list. Whatever. It reminds me, it definitely reminds me of stuff Tony Banks would do. I think it could almost fit on We Can't Dance. It's an instrumental tune. I think it's called Around the World in 80 presets because it really feels like Phil has this super expensive, or expensive for the 90s, super expensive keyboard, and he's just kind of going through all the different presets and playing with the different sounds. I think there's bird sounds too. It was maybe one of those Alesis ones, you know, that came with like the discs or the cartridge or something. Anyway, it is kind of interesting. It's rhythmic. It's almost Brazilian a little bit. It actually could be called the Brazilian. It kind of sounds more Brazilian than the Brazilian. But yeah, it's an instrumental, and I think it sounds pretty cool. It's kind of new agey, like song number 8 on my list, which is Two Worlds, which is a new agey song from the album soundtrack Tarzan. And again, you know, Tarzan is so quintessential Phil, or not quintessential Phil, but it's so associated, tied to Phil. But what would it have sounded like if we had, you know, listen, no disrespect to Mike. Mike is fantastic when it comes to kind of the Mike and the Mechanics rock pop sound, you know, like Living Years, All I Need Is a Miracle, Follow You, Follow Me, Tell Me Why, Never a Time, that kind of stuff. I love that music. Absolutely love that music. But some of the more kind of moody Phil Collins songs is where it would be really interesting to hear Tony Banks on. And that's kind of weird to me that Phil never reached out to never had the guys involved. I think he asked Tony Banks how to play the chords to Groovy Kind of Love. And I think Into Deep started as a solo song and then became a Genesis song, but I didn't see much, like, we don't see much crossover, you know? Whereas like Pete had Phil play on his solo record, Tony had Chester play on his solo record, Anthony Phillips had Mike play on his solo record and Phil, but Phil didn't do that kind of crossover with exception of Daryl. Anyway, so Two Worlds would be a cool one to hear, like what Tony would do on the keyboards. Okay, number 6 would be I Don't Care Anymore. This is a very drum heavy song. It's kind of like Mama. It's very angry, which is like Phil's staple from that era. I think it's a fantastic Phil solo song. So I'm not suggesting any of these songs should not have been a Phil solo song, if you know what I mean. Like, that's not what this list is about. It's about, it would just be interesting to hear these songs through the Mike and Tony, maybe even Mike, Tony, Peter, Steve lens. That could be really cool. I mean, none of these songs date back far enough to really have that 70s, early 70s Genesis vibe at all. So most of these just be kind of interesting to be like, what would this have sounded like on Shapes? Or what would this have sounded like on We Can't Dance, Invisible Touch, etc. Same with number 6, Take Me Home. You know, Take Me Home is like an ominous tune. It's kind of dark. I mean, it has that repeated drum machine similar to Duchess in a way. So it's one that could be explored. And I mean, it's a long song live, and that would be really interesting. I mean, it kind of could almost have been like a Fading Lights ending to Invisible Touch. And again, we don't know too much about the songs that Phil kept for himself and then songs that he would offer to Genesis. Why did this go on No Jacket Required and not in Invisible Touch? Now, I think the answer to that is from Abacab on, they essentially wrote together in the studios. They wouldn't bring material. That's what makes some of those records different from Duke and Pryor. But it still doesn't like mean we can't do this fun little exercise to think about what Take Me Home would sound like if there was like a big, long, epic middle section similar to Fading Lights, like a long solo. Now, again, I think most of these I'm pretty happy with being a Phil Collins song, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 or 3. I don't think they should have been Genesis songs, but it's just interesting to think about. Number 5 is Colors. I'll tell you why I put this on my list. I think that Colors was actually 2 songs. I believe the first song is called Him, which is about watching bad news on TV and not really knowing how to react to it because it's happening far away. And then the second half of the song, where it kind of gets up a little bit more excited, is about the South African apartheid. So we know that like Phil kind of sewed these 2 songs together, that they were kind of written separately, maybe this together, but I mean, they were originally intended to be 2 songs, as far as I know. It's probably Phil's biggest epic at this time. He hadn't done something, with the exception of like Droned and Hand in Hand, if you put that together, but he hadn't really done something that was this long and having kind of like a time signature change. I always wonder if this writing process for the song or this production process was inspired by how Genesis would do things in the old days. I mean, we know that the Duke Suite, which included Duchess and Turn It On Again, that was supposed to be one side in the same way that Supper's Ready was. And Supper's Ready is not one song that was written in one setting. It's a bunch of little ideas from various points in the studio sessions and in various points in their career that they put together to make this epic. And so there's a bit of inspiration there, I think, from Genesis writing styles into Phil's writing style, about the concept of taking 2 completely different song ideas and sewing them together cohesively. Do you guys see these little bugs? Are they flying in front of the lens? Like, where are they coming from? It's springtime. Maybe they're coming from the plants. They're driving me crazy. I swear, if I swallow one, this video's over. Okay, number 4, In the Air Tonight. Now, this is a big topic, okay? Again, let's just remind you, I know that Tony said that it's a good thing they didn't do this song because they probably would have ruined it, which is cute of him to say. And of course, I'm super glad Genesis didn't do this song, because I don't think we would have Phil Collins' solo career without this song. We wouldn't have this channel. You wouldn't get to see my pretty face every week. So I'm not suggesting they should have done this song. However, I think they could have. In fact, if Phil took Behind the Lines for face value from Duke and borrowed that, but they still did it on Duke, they could have done their own version of In the Air Tonight, or In the Air Tonight would have sounded pretty cool on Abacab. I think in hindsight, it wouldn't have been an issue to share songs like that. Now, the fact of the matter is they're all really great writers and they had a ton of music to work with. So they didn't really need extra song. I'm not going to get into the argument of whether or not Phil showed this demo of In the Air Tonight to Tony and Mike. Mike says he doesn't remember. Phil says he does. Tony said he didn't. So we're kind of at a three-way tie here. I personally think, and it's my opinion is the only one that matters, I personally think he did show it to them just because this cassette has all of these demos. Like I Missed Again, The Roof is Leaking has a demo, If Leaving Me Is Easy, This Must Be Love, I believe has a demo. I almost think that there's like a demo for almost every song with the exception of maybe Droned and I'm Not Moving, if I'm not mistaken. Like there is a demo version of everything from Face Value mostly. And so including In the Air Tonight. So it just doesn't make sense that he wouldn't have shown them. And Phil wouldn't have thought this is a big hit. So it's not like he would have withheld it. Now, what would this have sounded like? I think it would have sounded very similar to what it is. In fact, I think Mama is their version of In the Air Tonight. It's very similar. Drums come in much later. It's ominous. It's spooky. It doesn't really have a meaning. As much as I love In the Air Tonight, I really love Mama. I think they're very similar. So Genesis didn't need to do this song, but boy, would that be interesting hearing them do it. I honestly think that like any Genesis version of any Phil Collins song would just be a little bit slower, a little bit spookier, and a little more drawn out. Coming in at number 3, I maybe would drop this all the way down on my list and swap it with Around the World. But number 3 is Droned. And I was thinking about Phil's instrumentals. I mean, Hand in Hand is very clearly like tribal, African, a little bit Gracelandy, almost a little Motown-y with the horns. I love Hand in Hand. Top 10, top 5 PC songs for me. But Droned is different. Droned is kind of like an intro into Hand in Hand. It's a little bit less rhythmic, much less rhythmic. Lots of piano going on. I definitely think this would have been a Genesis song. I mean, it's almost borderlining some of the instrumentals they did a little bit later, maybe like Submarine a little bit, but slightly faster. It's super interesting. I mean, around this time, this could have been a good segue on Duke. I think it's similar to like Duke's Travels in a way. And I mean, it's probably even inspired by that time, that process. Great song. I like Droned. I don't love Droned, but I like Droned. And I think it'd be cool to have some electric guitar from Mike in there to see what they do with it. Number 2 is Long, Long Way to Go. This song stands out a lot on No Jacket Required, doesn't it? It's a fan favorite. I really like it. It's cool. It's got Sting on it. I think this would have made a great track on Shapes if it was around at that time. It's spooky. It's dark. It's ominous. It could go on for a really long time. It has that kind of like dark, verby, gated toms in it, but not in an overly Phil Collins way. I actually also think it kind of stands out on No Jack Required a bit. Not in a bad way. It's just not a club song like the rest of the tracks on the album. So it maybe would have served better on an album like Invisible Touch or on Shapes. In fact, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Tonight Tonight, do you think? Maybe less upbeat? Anyway, Long, Long Way to Go is number 2. And number 1, the most obvious Phil Collins solo song that would have sounded great as a Genesis song is Do You Know, Do You Care? That's the name of the song. It's not like a rhetorical question. Do You Know, Do You Care from the album Hello, I Must Be Going? That's a great song. It's not like, you know what I come to Phil for like melodic. I come to Phil for like harmonies I can scream out at the top of my lungs, songs that I can dance to like Stu Studio. So Long, Long Way to Go and Do You Know, Do You Care are pretty low on my list of Phil Collins songs because they feel more like they'd be Genesis songs. And so I don't really feel like I think they're great songs and they fit really well. And Do You Know, Do You Care fits okay on Hello, I Must Be Going. It was a little bit of a juxtaposition of sound from that and then stuff like I Cannot Believe It's True or You Can't Hurry Love in the same way that like In the Air Tonight is a bit of a juxtaposition to I Missed Again or Droned is a little bit the opposite of Behind the Lines. Which is cool, makes for an eclectic album. But yeah, I think Do You Know, Do You Care would be right up Mike's alley. Lots of cool electric guitar happening there. Very scary and ominous. I've always said, we talked about this recently with Bill Smith, about the dark, ominous album cover of Genesis self-titled, how like these children's toys that no longer look like children's toys because they're a black background, they look like they're falling on you in a nightmare. That and then the spookiness of Mama and Home by the Sea makes that solo or that self-titled record kind of a spooky record. So this song would work really well on that. I know that that album was like far off in the minds of this band. I think at the time it would have been even before Abacab. So it's kind of irrelevant to say all this, but I think Do You Know, Do You Care is the most obvious Genesis song hidden in a Phil Collins song. Like I mentioned at the top of this video, I'm not suggesting these should have been Phil Collins songs. If you want to know that, I would say, please don't ask, maybe misunderstanding, although I think that's cool. But please don't ask for sure, should have been on face value. In the place of Tomorrow Never Knows. I know that's my opinion. And then, you know, take one of these weirder tunes like Droned or Do You Know, Do You Care and put that on an album like Duke. Again, these songs didn't exist at the right time. And we have so many great songs from both bands and individual artists that this is a pointless video, but who cares? We're just having fun here. Let me know in the description, in the comments down below, let me know if there are some Phil Collins solo songs that you'd like to hear the band do. If Tony Banks could get his hands on some of Phil's solo material, what do you think that would be? Thanks for watching. And thanks to our Patreons for supporting this channel. Come on over there and join us for some exclusive content. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button for exclusive videos, behind the scenes content, and to have your say on future topics before I film. Have a look at our Patreon page. Thanks for watching.